Chicago is in crisis. It's the pandemic no one wants to talk about. Gun violence. In small towns and cities across our nation, gun violence is traumatizing communities and robbing children of their futures. In 2020 alone, mass shootings increased by 70%. The toll of gun violence affects brown and black communities the most. Black residents are more likely to die by gun violence, 32 times more than white residents. In addition, gun violence has a severe economic consequence, costing the state of Illinois over $10 billion each year. With summer upon us and the states reopening, many worry about the increased gun violence in our communities. READI, which stands for Rapid Employment and Development Initiative, is a program that believes that helping people heal from trauma and develop skills that create pathways to safety and opportunity has the potential to save lives and increase public safety. This model combines cognitive behavioral therapy with paid transitional employment as a tool to help reduce violence. Eddie Bocanegra is the Senior Director of READI Chicago. His years of experience in community-based organizations and programs created to address trauma in communities most affected by violence. The Chicago Defender spoke with him about what can be done to address the increased violence in our city and communities around the country. Talk to me a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm the senior director for Heart and Alliance READI Chicago, and so in essence, what I do is manage perhaps one of the largest anti-violence programs in the country, and it's a program that's really focusing on high-risk individuals. And by that I mean, based on police and hospital data, based on a number of data points, we could tell you that the folks that we work with are at the highest risk of gun involvement. In fact, they're 45 times more likely to be a victim of gun violence or a perpetrator of gun violence compared to any average 18-year-old Chicagoan. 18
Okay.
older Chicagoan, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to give you a snapshot of who it is that we work with, just to, about 80% of the men that we work with have been victims of violence. They've been assaulted, they've been stabbed, been shot. 1/3 of the men, out of the 1,600 men that we've been able to support, 1/3 of the men that we've served, about 37% of them to be exact, have been victims or survivors of gun violence before they came to the program. So, next to hospitals or VAs, I don't know if there's another program in this country that works with so many gunshot victim survivors, right? Like that offers a program, right?
Right.
What I would also say, again, this is only to give you a snapshot of who it is that we're serving. About 80% of the men that we work with have only completed a 10th grade level of education, but they're reading at the 5th grade level. So if you think about what does that mean for people who are either they have learning disabilities, they just simply dropped out of school because of safety issues or for a number of different reasons, right? That we've learned. They're also excluded even further, from these communities. So even within Black and Brown communities that are already marginalized, there's still a set of group of people there that are marginalized within the marginalized, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So even social service providers have a hard time servicing this population because they're what we consider non-social service seekers. They're the kind of people that are not going to, agencies and asking for help. You have to come to them, you have to find them, and you have to convince them, why they need services. The other important fact that I'll mention is that 80% of our men have unstable housing. So if you think about just basic, science, right? Maslow hierarchy of needs. If people don't have food, shelter, or safety, right? How can you expect for upward mobility for them as well, right? So housing is a really, really big challenge for a lot of the men that we work with. Either they're coming out of the Department of Corrections without housing or unstable housing, or something when they're coming out of prison, they're going back to the same home, same communities that actually, was a starting point for them to, go to prison to begin with. So, I could go on, but ultimately, the last thing that I'll say around this is what we do is provide transitional jobs What we also do is provide cognitive behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral interventions, what we call it. And in some cases, we provide housing and we provide an array of other social services. That's what British Chicago is. Like they're able to work with us for up to 40 hours a week. They could if they chose to. Sometimes they come there once a week. We don't fire them. We meet them where they're at, and we try to build them up by providing a coach, a mentor, an outreach worker, a case manager, and then now more recently, engaging the family as well. Because they might be with us, right, 8 hours a day, meaning they might be with us, and they chose to be with us, 8 hours. But then they go back to the community and they go back to their homes. So we also have to figure out a way how do we address those environments as well? How do we support those environments?
Now, one of the things we've talked about previously with state's attorney is this holistic approach to violence prevention, very similar to what you're talking about, where you're providing services to help people economically, their health, addressing trauma, previous traumas. How does that or the lack thereof affect violence that's happening in communities like Chicago?
And it's so funny you say that because I'm smiling, smirking on my end because so I had a meeting with President Biden on Wednesday. So I'm at the White House, small group, very intimate group, right? And the president asked me, like, Eddie, what do you recommend? Like, what do you think we need? What do you need, Eddie, from us? What do you need from me? And I said to him, like, well, you have a lot of law enforcement here, and there's right. I keep hearing about targeting the people who are drivers of violence and arresting them. But what I don't hear is an opportunity to really saturate them with resources. The men that we work with, they didn't choose to be born to the communities they were born into, or the families they were born into. And so in many ways, like they have limited options to choose from. But the truth is that these men, 90% of the men that we work with, don't want to live this lifestyle. Like they're looking for alternatives, but too often they don't know what those alternatives are. They don't know whether they exist, right? And so it's hard for them to see beyond, right, what could look like, what the future could look like, what it could be. But then, a large part of this, and this is what I told the president, is that what I have not heard in that meeting was the issue around trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The issue of historical trauma that many of the men that we work with right now, their fathers, their grandfathers, right, have experienced. This issues around race and equity. Like this is nothing new. Like we didn't need George Floyd to happen in order for us to see, right, there was already inequities to begin with.
Right.
Those are just visible examples, right, of like, here's the injustice that we've been telling America for so many decades, right?
Right.
So having said that, in order for the men that we work with in READI to be able to not only take advantage of what we're offering, but to build on these opportunities, right? Like meaning having a full-time employment in the future, right? Going back to school. That means that we have to do a couple of things. One is that we have to be able to build relationships. Many of the folks that we work with, and like they either themselves or because of their childhood, right, have these fractured relationships with loved ones.
Yeah.
And it's funny because sometimes the abuse came from loved ones, and in spite of that abuse, they're still like, hey, that's my mom's, or that's my dad, right? That's still my uncle, it's still my sister. So part of it is like, well, how do we untangle that? How do we address, right, the issues around trust that we have? It's even as we think about trust with the police, right? That's one thing. Like we don't trust too often institutions, right? Especially when the institutions don't look like us. So and as it is, right, we also have a hard time trusting our own family members because they robbed us or because of other issues that have happened at home or because of things that happen. So we are suffering from the inability to trust one another. So that means we have to spend some real time to develop those relationships. And that too often then, is something that people don't always want to invest in. People don't care about. The government doesn't want to invest in relationships, but we do it with the foreign countries. So why can't we do it here?
Right.
So relationships do matter, and that's what I'm pointing out. Because once you have established a relationship, then you're able to talk about these difficult situations, right? Then we're able to use kind of behavioral therapy or kind of behavioral intervention services, right? Work where we untangle certain situations, we unpack certain things that happen in our lives, or how to navigate situations. then from that process, people reflect, and that's the important part, Danielle, too. Is like, you know, I've heard recently this young brother named Sylvester, just yesterday, as a matter of fact, as he was talking to a number of funders, and he was saying how prison, he was great. You know, he appreciated the fact that in prison he had time to think, right?
Hmm.
For lawmakers, right? For law enforcement, they'll say, you see, this is why we got to lock up people, so you can sit your ass down and think.
Right.
And so I had to step in and say that I think what you're trying to say is like, because you were removed from the chaos, right? You were able to reflect, and your words were, I know that there was more meaning in my life than what I.
Hmm.
And for the first time, right, you were probably really untangling, unpacking that. Like, what is your purpose in life? If you believe in God, what did God bring into this world, right? If you believe in other things, like what's your purpose in this life, right? And it was him who started like say untangling, like this is what I was able to process during the 13 years that I was away.
Mm.
Same thing for another gentleman who did 20 years.
Yeah.
Now, I say that, because again, what many of our residents and many of the men in Red Chicago are exhibiting, right, are symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of trauma, and that has so many ways that it manifests itself.
Absolutely. No, but you bring up a good point. Like one of the things that a lot of sociologists have discussed is people, particularly children, teenagers who grow up in these environments where where you're just used to it. You're used to gunshots. You're used to hearing the stories on the news. It will develop, especially in young people, almost a PTSD. Um, and one of the things that we have found, and one of the things that's been said, is that everyone had talked about defunding the police. And we talked to a police chief that said, the city defunded social services long before anyone was talking about this. And nobody's addressing that fact. Nobody's addressing the root
Wow.
causes and this was the head of the Illinois Police Chiefs Association who said that. He said, we defunded them a long time ago, and now law enforcement is expected to be counselors, therapists, all these other things, and they don't have the capacity to do that. What can lawmakers on the local and federal level do to really start addressing the root causes of violence when we're talking about violence prevention?
Well, then let me point this something out, right? So I sit in this kind of space, right, where you have the advocates, the abolitionists, right, who are like, screw the police, defund them, right? And that defunding means a number of different things for a number of different
Right.
people, right? Some people say, well, just get rid of the police in general, and other people say, like, no, we mean by, just like, repurpose some of the dollars, right? And
Hmm.
different things. And I get it, right? I get that part more than the other
Yeah.
part, right?
Right.
Um, and I say this to people all the time. When I talk to our participants in Ready, and when I talk to the communities that we come from, people are not saying they don't want to see police.
Right.
They're not saying that.
Right.
Even the guys that are getting shot up, right, who are on the streets, they're not saying, hey, we don't want to F the police. We don't care. Like, we don't want to see the police. They might say F the police because of a personal issue they might have, or because they're doing something illegal, right? But they recognize that the police has a role to play in that community.
Right.
And so to say simply that we're going to pull police off and so on, right? That's not going to solve anything. It's going to create more of a chaos. But I think what I'm also hearing is that the community and our participants in Ready are saying, what we don't want is the police to abuse us, to infringe upon our rights.
Hmm.
We don't want that. We want to be able to trust them. And they recognize not all police are bad. They recognize that, right? So I think having said that, right, to your question, is that law enforcement is a part of the solution to gun violence.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's a reason why the police department in Chicago took off 11,000 guns in our city. When you talk about, what are the root causes? Well, the root cause is that we have a surplus of weapons coming into our city, right, by neighboring states, Missouri, Indiana, right, where they don't have as tight as law, policies as we do here in Chicago or Illinois.
Yeah.
So that according to the president's conversation, that is going to change. right? They're going to be emphasizing more of those federal laws, right, to enforce that, which is great. Straw purchasing, accountability around that. So that's good to hear. On the other side of all that too, in terms of like, what else, the root causes that we continue to see. Well, there's the lack of trust with law enforcement. You're right, for the police officer that brass to say what he stated is that
Mm-hmm.
think about Rahm Emanuel's administration, right? What the mayor did, he pulled out the resources for mental health, right?
Yeah, 80%.
Right? He shut down the schools.
Yep.
It might have been a economic, reason why he did that, less students and so on. But those places weren't converted. There was no plan immediately after that, right? And there was like so there's the mistrust again, right? See the pattern of
Yeah.
mistrust over and over and over, right? And then the fact is too is that you know there's all these social services that are we're seeing less and less of, and at the end of the day, like we can't expect the police to respond to all those things. Because
Mm-hmm.
what it does is that the police's resources are being put into other places, right? Instead of focusing on the more violent offenses, like solving murders, solving shootings, right? Solving those kind of cases. So in essence, they're unable to do that. And in essence, because they're responding to every single little incident, right? Um, the pressure they're also dealing with, right? I can only imagine, I'm not a police officer, but I can only imagine the pressures they're under is that then you have all these precious social ills that they're responsible for to some extent that they're asked to be responsible for. And then you have like George Floyd incident, you're having all these different things that only brings these to the surface, right? These emotions from many folks in our communities, right? Around why we don't trust police, right?
Yeah.
So now we're like, man, you pull me over, I'm pulling out my camera, I'm recording you, I don't trust you.
Yeah.
You're talking about my hands on a thing, like you're the one with the gun, right?
Right.
And we're seeing incidents over and over. And so the police, there's a lack of, according to the president, there's a lack of morale right now with law enforcement.
I'm sure. In your conversation with the president, what was discussed as far as outside of the changing some of the gun laws? What else can be done? Can we start pushing our legislators and our politicians to do, as you said, almost reallocating funds where we're investing more into resources that address trauma at the root in our communities to hopefully avoid potential violence? What can be done? I guess that's my greater question. What on a national level or even locally, what can we do?
Sometimes I wonder why the mayor or why certain government just don't want to fund this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because we also pimp out our own communities and our own clients, our own participants, right? So that we have a job. So I struggle with that. I struggle with that.
That's real. That's real.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I care the most about is, are we seeing our return of our investment with the dollars that we're putting into these communities?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or are we just recycling staff? We use different names to do the same thing, the same outcomes, right? And I'm stuck there, Danielle, because there's too much politics in Chicago. There's too much cronyism. There's a reason why the city of Chicago is not funding me, right? And because I don't want to be a part of those kind of, like I want to, when you as a taxpayer, I'm going to assume do you live in Chicago?
Mm-hmm. Yep, Southsider.
Okay. All right. So you are a taxpayer. And my hope is that taxpayers at some point ask the city, how was their money being invested in gun violence? Mm-hmm. What is the return of the investment? And show us, right? Show us by the impact that those dollars actually had. Mm-hmm. If you're investing $1 billion into law enforcement, what was the measurable outcomes of that? Mm-hmm. If you're investing $30 million, right? Big contrast of money. This is why I'm like, Louis Lightfoot, man, you promised all this stuff. Where you at? Right?
Right.
And you're investing only $30 million in gun violence. First of all, that's not equitable, right? It's not even close. Secondly, right, I would say, what is the impact that those dollars are actually having to make a difference in our community? And don't give me this excuse about COVID. Because there's a lot you could do with COVID in existence too, right? We use it as an excuse quite a bit. Not to say that we should not think about how we're pivoting, but that's also an excuse that we hear too often. And so
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, it's like, how are we elevating quality, Danielle? How are we changing systems? How are we going
Mm-hmm.
with the families? For people who are being released from prison, instead of the mayor and the police department saying you're the reason why you're lifting up, there's an increase in gun violence, which is not true, right?
Right.
Kim Fox will tell you that. The crime lab will tell you that. The Department of Corrections will tell you that based on their data. So
Mm-hmm.
why don't we keep pushing down on people who are just trying to figure out how to put their head up so they can breathe? And you want to put
Mm-hmm.
them down, right? Especially when they're black and brown folks for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I struggle with that. So at the end of the day, here's what I'm going to tell you what works. This is the science. This is data. This is why the president had me in that room. Through a randomized controlled trial study, which is the most rigorous evaluation that anybody could have, right, for any study. We know that our participants in READI Chicago, that 80% of them have been less likely to have been arrested for murder or attempt murder. We know that. That's a fact. We know that 40% of our participants are also less likely to be shot and killed. We know that. Now, we know that cognitive behavioral therapy, mental health, is part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Jobs,
Yeah.
jobs are important. And not jobs for just some, but also jobs for those who have been marginalized within the marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
Those that are coming home from prison, those who have been victims of gun violence, and those who are the drivers of the gun violence right now. How
Yeah.
do we invite them back into our community, right? So that's critical. That's part of the solution. Relationships.
Yeah, you're literally echoing everything that Kim Fox and I talked about. She literally was saying the same thing. So
Well,
it's just
I'm not surprised.
yeah,
I'm not surprised. And I'm not surprised there, right? Because you know why? Here's why. Because her office, for the first time, has not only expanded the capacity to bring in data and research, right? But they're actually damn implementing it, man.
yeah.
And Alina Alvarez, what a joke, man.
Hmm.
Like, so much harm that was created there.
Hmm.
Because you're black or brown, right? And you went to prison and you were shot, you
Yeah.
know, doesn't mean that you don't qualify for some assistance. On the contrary, man. That's why I'm
Right.
glad what she's doing. I'm glad what the Attorney General is doing as well, right? There's a huge alignment there. The problem that I would say, Danielle, and I don't, this wouldn't be a surprise for your readers because they'll understand this, but there's another population that don't might not also not always read the Chicago Defender, right? Which I hope they do. Which is that these issues don't operate in silos. Like it impacts all of us, all of our
Hmm.
city, all of our county, and all of our state,
Absolutely.
one way or the other, right? And then at the end of the day, is that as we think about public safety and criminal justice, right? You don't have to sacrifice one to get the other one.
Right.
We all recognize that our country's leading in prisons and jails and that kind of stuff, right? And we're like, oh, that's wrong, right? That's wrong. But all of a sudden, you see a spike in gun violence, you see a spike here, and right away, it's like, we should lock them up, throw away the key. That's not the solution.
Right.
Like we at Ready know who's driving the violence,
Hmm.
but we don't have enough resources, right, to really support all those who are driving the violence. I think that's where Kim Fox is also struggling, right? People being released, from the jails with gun offenses, right? And they have every right to either post bond or whatever they have to do, just like any American citizen, right? Any Chicago, any person from Cook County, you know. But we don't think about that because they're black or they're brown.
Yeah.
We judge based on the way they look or where they come from. Oh, they're from Inglewood. Shit, they're up to no good over there, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But if that person was living in, I don't know, Winnetka, Skokie, Evanston, right, Lincoln Park, it'd be like, oh, of course they deserve, just like anybody else, equitable opportunities for bonding out, right?
Yeah.
Of course they should be released on their own account. It's just not fair, man.
Yeah. And give them resources to assist, whether it's therapy or otherwise. It's a very different. And that was another thing she talked about, looking at, defendants. She's like, obviously, I get them after the fact, but going back and understanding their history, their childhood, how they grew up, the neighborhood, all impacts who they are, how they operate, and giving people an opportunity to unpack, address those issues so they give them the tools, whether it be mental health, emotional health, psychological, financial, and being able to provide for yourselves and your family, and the sense of pride and ownership that comes with that, to allow them to become, active members in their society. And when you don't have that, it's this endless cycle, of in and out, in and out. So to me, it just seems like a very simple way of looking at things. People, when they're given opportunities, equitably, can can have a chance.
Yeah.
Things like that. It just seems like it's proven that addressing this from a holistic perspective works.
And here's the thing that I learned about politics. And I get policy and I understand it, but like I understand to some extent, but it feels to me, right, that you win an election and right away, the next day, you're thinking about the next election,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're not willing to put political capital or social capital to really, really what I would consider disrupt the way that we've gone about business, right? So when I look at the Attorney General, when I look at our state attorney Kim Fox, uh, when I look at President Perkwinkle,
Mm-hmm.
when I look at Lieutenant Governor Stratton, four key leaders for me, four key
Yeah.
leaders. Notice I didn't include the mayor in that, but four key leaders, right? That are disrupting the way that we've done business. They are disrupting the way that black and brown men are looked at. They are disrupting the systems that have produced, right, these kind of pathways to the prison system, right? And they get held for that. And I'm an example, right? I'm a prime example, and I'm very public with my life for that reason, because I'm like, no, if you invest in someone, this is what you get, right? Like I'm wearing my UFC shirt, got my master's at UFC
Mm.
after spending 14 years in prison, after being in a gang, right? I didn't go to prison for purse snatching. I went for a violent offense, right? And it's none of that I'm proud of. But what I'm proud of is what that journey has taught me, right? And so what I say to you is that, you know, to me, and when I think about the mayor,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think her or other people who are in government, right, don't always care about outcomes because it takes 3 to 4 years, right, to see those outcomes. 3 or 4 years later, you're up for election, right? 3 or 4 years later, it's like by the time those outcomes might come out, might be the next time you're in office, right? So between
Mm.
now and then, people are reluctant, right, to invest on what you just pointed out, common sense.
Right.
Like we're reluctant because there's a small percentage of people, right, that are going to say, "Oh, that's not working. Why are we putting money into this?" And then the headlines, no offense to reporters, right? The headlines becomes ads.
Yeah. Yeah.
They it'll be like, you know, 100,000 people were released from prison. They were released early, and you got this one person, right, who committed, another case, maybe a murder, maybe he did something that he wasn't supposed to do, and we focus on that one person. This is why the governor shouldn't have done this, or why, Kim Fox's office shouldn't have done this.
Yeah.
But then you think about, well, what will happen to those other 999 people, right?
Right.
Like, who's speaking for them? And if that's the case, why don't we do that with law enforcement? Why don't we do that with other institutions?
Mm-hmm.
You see
Mm-hmm.
what you see what I'm trying to get to, like in the sense, like the sense of like not being equitable in all that we do, and what does equity
Yeah.
really mean? I think, right, that somebody who's also a black woman who was a prosecutor, right, federal prosecutor, who's in this space in the city, who has a platform,
Yeah.
as opposed to like supporting what she's doing around criminal justice reform, right? Um, you would think she would do that, but she's not, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, the mayor's role doesn't have any really substantial data to make the point she's pointing out, right? So she only adds further fuels, right? This national, as you pointed out, rhetoric around our state attorney, which is a shame because we have an opportunity to really change our systems, as
Mm-hmm.
well. And why can't we just, why is it so hard for people to do the right thing in government?
Yeah.
But clearly Kim Fox and clearly the Attorney General and President Perkwinkle have really pushed through that envelope, right? And they're prime examples. And when I think about President Perkwinkle, he has a track record,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And as I shared with folks at the White House too, it's like to look at what she's done around criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
Prime
Yeah.
example and what could happen nationally. Uh, why I'm hopeful. I am hopeful because when I left that meeting with the president, I've never seen or heard any other president. I've asked other people who've been in the field much longer than I have in gun violence and criminal justice. I've never heard of any other president who, in his first 100 days, took the charge of the gun violence issue, right? And he's pushing his colleagues, he's pushing others, right, to support this epidemic. He's making it a public health, crisis, and so that gives me a sense of hope. And the fact that he did not mind the fact that I was in prison, that he had me there, and I've been working with some of the White House officials there too, to kind of just share information through another coalition called Fund Peace, which is all Black and Brown led folks in the space of gun violence across the country. So this coalition of Fund Peace has been really helping to inform the president's office about what should be happening in our urban communities, right, where this issue of gun violence is impacting us. So I'm very hopeful around what we're seeing there.
I can't thank you enough for talking to the Chicago Defender about this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.